The locksmith pressed his mouth close to my ear and said, "Don't go home tonight. Check your will first before you end up like your wife." I stood there in the doorway of his workshop, holding my late wife's keyring, unable to move. My legs had gone completely hollow. Her name was Margaret. Margaret Hollis. She had been gone for 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, not that I was counting, except that I was. Every single morning when I woke up on my side of the bed and the other side was cold and undisturbed. She had died of what the doctors called cardiac arrhythmia. She had been 61 years old and in reasonable health, and then one Thursday evening she had simply stopped breathing on the kitchen floor while I was out at my bowls club. That was what I had been told. My name is Geoffrey Hollis. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a high school history teacher in Hamilton, and I retired 3 years ago with a modest super, a vegetable garden I never properly maintained, and a wife I had loved since we were both in our 20s. After Margaret died, I became the sort of man who takes long walks without knowing where he is going, who forgets to eat until mid-afternoon, who stands in supermarket aisles holding a tin of soup and reading the label 6 times without retaining a single word. The reason I had gone to see the locksmith, his name is Colin Strang, and he and his wife Bev had been friends with us since our children were small, was because Margaret had carried a keyring with 2 keys on it that I had never been able to identify. One was clearly a padlock key, small and brass. The other was unusual, a narrow, ridged thing I did not recognize. I had found the keyring in the pocket of her good coat when I finally began sorting her clothes. I had been putting that task off for months, and I am not ashamed to say it. Going through her things felt like dismantling evidence that she had ever existed. I brought the keys to Colin because he knows locks the way. I once knew the causes of the First World War thoroughly, almost instinctively. His workshop is attached to the back of his house in a quiet street in Frankton, and he has operated it for over 30 years. I thought he might recognize the unusual key without any fuss. I was not prepared for what happened instead. He had been examining both keys under his bench light, turning them slowly, saying nothing, and I had been watching his face the way you watch a doctor's face when they are reading a test result. At first, he looked merely thoughtful. Then, something shifted. His eyebrows drew together, and he put the padlock key down and looked only at the narrow one for a long moment. He got up and walked to the workshop door. I assumed he was going to fetch a reference book or a catalog from a shelf. Instead, he closed the door. Then he turned the deadbolt. He came back to the bench and sat down very close to me and lowered his voice to something barely above a breath. "This is a safe deposit box key, Geoffrey. I've fitted the locks on 3 of these for a firm in town. I recognize the profile." He paused. "But that's not what I need to tell you." I waited. "Bev saw something," he said. "Back in September. She's been carrying it around ever since, and it's been eating her alive. But she was frightened. After what happened to Margaret, she was frightened." He looked at his hands. "I told her this morning that if she didn't tell someone, I would. And then you walked in here with that key ring." He called out to Bev then, and she came through from the house. She had been crying recently. Her eyes were swollen at the corners. She sat down across from me and folded her hands in her lap like someone about to give a statement, which I suppose is precisely what she was doing. She told me that on a Sunday afternoon in late September, about 5 weeks before Margaret died, she had driven over to our house to return a casserole dish Margaret had lent her. She had knocked, received no answer, and then remembered that Margaret kept a spare key under the pot plant by the back door. They had done that for each other for years. It was a neighborly habit neither had ever thought to question. She let herself in through the laundry, intending to leave the dish on the bench and go. She heard voices in the hallway. She stopped. The voices belonged to our son, Daniel, and to a woman Bev did not recognize. They were speaking in low, clipped tones, the kind of tones that are deliberately controlled. Bev said she knew immediately that it was not a normal conversation. She could not explain how she knew. She simply knew. She stood very still in the laundry, and she listened. The woman said, "She'll have another episode within 6 weeks, if you keep the dose consistent. Her heart is already showing the strain. It won't look unnatural." Daniel said. "And afterwards?" The woman said, "The will is what matters. You need to make sure she signs the amended version before." And then Bev heard footsteps moving toward the kitchen, and she panicked. She set the casserole dish down without a sound and went back out the laundry door. She sat in her car at the end of our street for 20 minutes before she felt steady enough to drive home. She had told no one, not even Colin. Not until the morning I walked into the workshop. I do not know how long I sat there after she finished. Colin poured me a glass of water, and I drank it without tasting it. The workshop smelled of machine oil and sawdust, and I focused on that smell for a while because it was something real and fixed and not in the process of falling apart. Margaret had not had a heart attack. My son had arranged for someone to give her one. Daniel is 41. He is our eldest child. He works as a financial advisor in Auckland, and he has always had an easy confidence about him. The sort that people find attractive until they know him well enough to notice the calculation underneath it. Margaret adored him. She made excuses for the times he did not call, for the Christmases he spent elsewhere, for the money he had borrowed across the years and never returned. I had been less generous in my assessments of him, and we had argued about this more than once. Margaret always said I was too hard on him. I always said she loved him too much to see clearly. I had not considered the possibility that I was not hard enough. Our daughter Paula is 37. She lives 20 minutes from us in Te Awamutu, and she had taken Margaret's death the hardest of anyone. She had sat with me every day for the first fortnight, bringing food I did not eat, sitting quietly when I did not want to talk, driving me to the funeral home when I could not trust myself behind the wheel. Paula and Daniel had never been especially close. He found her, I think, too straightforward. She had a habit of saying plainly what she meant, and he was not a person who appreciated that quality in others. I sat in Colin's workshop, and I thought about the way Daniel had behaved at Margaret's funeral. Composed, organized, the first to speak to the funeral director, the first to review the order of service, the first to ask me gently, reasonably, only a week after we had buried her, whether I had looked at the will lately. I had not thought anything of it at the time. People ask strange questions in grief. They anchor themselves to practical matters because the practical matters are bearable and the other things are not. Now I thought of something else. About 3 months before Margaret died, she had asked me to witness her signature on a document. I had asked what it was, and she had said it was a small amendment to her will, something to do with how the super was structured. I had not read it. She was a careful woman with money, and I had trusted her judgment entirely. I had witnessed her signature and thought nothing more about it. I asked Colin if I could use his phone. I rang Paula. I kept my voice even, and I told her I needed her to come to Colin's place as soon as she could, that it was important, that she should not ring Daniel before she came. She arrived in 35 minutes. I watched her face while Bev repeated what she had told me, and I saw every stage of it, the confusion, the resistance, the dreadful moment of comprehension pass across her like weather. Paula is not a person who cries easily. She sat with her hands on her knees and stared at the bench and said, very quietly, "I knew something was wrong. I knew it." The cardiologist said her episodes were unusual for someone with no prior history. She looked at me. "Dad, the will. We needed to find out what had been changed." Margaret's solicitor is a man named Robert Taufa, who operates out of a small firm in the CBD. He has handled our family's legal matters for 15 years. I rang him from Colin's workshop and told him only that I needed to review Margaret's most recent will as a matter of urgency. He was not in the habit of being rushed. but something in my voice communicated the seriousness, because he told me to come in at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Paula drove me. We did not speak much on the way. The radio was on, and some cheerful midday program was discussing a recipe for lemon slice, and the normality of it was almost unbearable. Robert met us in his office and retrieved the file with his customary unhurried manner. He laid the most recent will on the table between us. It was dated 8 weeks before Margaret died. The amendment she had signed, the one I had witnessed, restructured the primary beneficiary arrangement. Under the original will, the house and the bulk of our assets were to be divided equally between Daniel and Paula, with a portion set aside for grandchildren. Under the amended version, Daniel was designated sole primary beneficiary of the estate. Paula received a smaller, specified sum. I received the right to remain in the house during my lifetime, but the property itself would pass to Daniel upon my death. Robert watched me read it. He said, "This was processed through our office in October of last year. The amendment was brought in by your son on your wife's behalf. He said she had difficulty getting out due to her health. He said Daniel had been present at the signing." I looked up. Was that standard procedure? Robert was quiet for a moment. He is a careful man, and I could see him choosing his words. It is not irregular for a family member to assist, but it is not what I would have recommended. No. Paula had her hand over her mouth. I told Robert what Bev had told us. I watched him become very still, in the way that people become still when the ground they thought was solid reveals itself to be something else. He said he needed to make a call. He asked us to wait in the reception area. We waited for 40 minutes. When he came back, he told us he had spoken to a colleague in criminal law. He advised us to go to the police that afternoon and to touch nothing at the house in the meantime. He also said, and he said it carefully, looking directly at me, that I should not contact Daniel. Paula took me to the Hamilton Central Police Station at 3:30. The officer who took our initial statement was a woman named Detective Sergeant Wiremu, and she was the kind of person who listens to everything before she says anything. She asked us to go through it from the beginning, slowly, and she wrote everything down by hand in a notebook while her colleague recorded on a device. She asked Bev's full name and address. She asked about the safe deposit box key. I had not thought about the key since Colin told me what it was. In everything that had followed, I had simply put it in my jacket pocket and forgotten it. Detective Sergeant Wiremu looked at it for a long moment. She said it was consistent with a particular type of commercial safe deposit facility used by 2 firms in the city. She did not say anything further about it at that point, but I noticed she photographed it before she handed it back. That night, Paula drove me to her house, and I slept in the spare room. I lay there in the dark, and I thought about Margaret in our kitchen in the months before she died. She had seemed tired, genuinely tired, not the ordinary tiredness of a woman in her 60s, but a deeper, leeching tiredness. She had put it down to her iron levels. She had started having what she called her funny turns, brief moments where her heart seemed to stumble in her chest. She had seen a GP who referred her to a cardiologist, but the appointment had been 6 weeks out and she never reached it. I thought about how often Daniel had visited in those final months. More than usual, he had started calling her every few days, which was not like him. I had been grateful for it. I had thought he was finally growing into himself, finally becoming the son I had wanted him to be. I pressed my face into the pillow, and I tried very hard not to think about what his voice had sounded like on the phone those evenings when Margaret answered, and her whole face changed with the pleasure of hearing from him. The following week moved slowly and then suddenly very fast. The police exhumed Margaret's body. I did not know that was coming. Detective Sergeant Wiremu told me only that they were pursuing several lines of inquiry and that I should be patient. Paula was the one who rang me on a Tuesday morning to say she had received a call from the detective and that it was happening. I sat in Paula's backyard with a cup of tea. I did not drink, and I looked at her tomato plants and I thought about the fact that the person I would once have wrung in this moment was the person we were now exhuming. The toxicology results took 11 days. The substance found in Margaret's tissue samples was a cardiac glycoside compound, a form of digitalis, used medicinally in controlled doses for heart conditions, and capable in sustained elevated doses of producing exactly the kind of cardiac event that had killed her. It was not something she had been prescribed. It was not something she had taken knowingly. The woman Bev had heard in the hallway was identified through phone records as a Dr. Lynette Carnaby, a former pharmacist who had lost her registration in 2019 following a dispensing fraud conviction. She had been living in Tauranga, and she had known Daniel through a mutual contact at a financial services firm where he had worked several years earlier. Her financial records showed 4 payments from Daniel over a period of 7 months, the last made in October. She was arrested on a Wednesday morning. Daniel was arrested the following Friday at his apartment in Auckland. Paula rang me when she got the call from the detective. I was in the vegetable garden, the one I had never properly maintained, and I had been pulling out the winter weeds in a slow, mindless way that was the closest I had come to peace in weeks. I sat down on the garden bed with the phone in my hand, and I stayed there for a long time after the call ended. There was still the matter of the safe deposit box. With a court order obtained by the police, the box was accessed at the firm Colin had identified. Inside was a sealed envelope, addressed to me, in Margaret's handwriting. I was allowed to read it in a room at the solicitor's office with Paula beside me and Detective Sergeant Wiremu present. Margaret had written it 3 months before she died. Her handwriting was a little unsteady. She had always written with a slight tremor that worsened when she was anxious. And reading it, I felt the tremor in every line. She wrote that she had begun to suspect something was wrong when she noticed the fatigue accelerating after the days Daniel visited. She had not wanted to believe it. She wrote that 3 times, in different ways. She had not wanted to believe it. She had started keeping a journal of her symptoms and their relationship to his visits. She had searched online carefully, privately, on the library computer for compounds that could produce cardiac symptoms. She had contacted a retired nurse she trusted, an old friend from her university days now living in Christchurch, who had confirmed her fears. She had not gone to the police because she had no physical proof. She had not told me because she knew me. She wrote this with a tenderness that made it difficult to continue reading. And she knew that I would confront him immediately. And she was afraid of what would happen next. Afraid for me, not for herself. What she had done instead was arrange for the will to be restored. She had contacted Robert Taufa privately, without Daniel's knowledge, and had dictated a new amendment that restored the original equal distribution between Paula and Daniel. She had signed it with Robert's colleague as sole witness. She had asked Robert to store her copy in the safe deposit box, along with her journal and a handwritten account of everything she suspected. She had also, in the last paragraph of the letter, asked me to forgive Daniel if I could. I could not. In that room, I could not even consider it. But I folded the letter carefully, and I held it in both hands, and I understood that she had been braver than I knew, and more frightened than she had ever let me see, and that she had spent the last months of her life trying to protect me after she was gone. The trial was held 8 months later. I will not describe all of it. There are parts I have no wish to revisit in detail. Daniel sat in the dock, looking like a man who had made a series of reasonable business decisions that had somehow resulted in an unfortunate outcome for others. His barrister argued that the evidence was circumstantial. The jury did not agree. Daniel was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. Lynette Carnaby was convicted as an accessory and sentenced to 11 years. I sat in the public gallery on the day of sentencing with Paula on one side of me and Colin and Bev on the other. When the verdicts were read, Paula took my hand. I let her hold it. I do not feel triumphant. I want to say that clearly. People have said to me since well-meaning people, people who care about me, that justice was done, that Margaret can rest, that it is over now. I understand why they say these things. I know they are trying to offer comfort. But the truth is that justice is cold. It is necessary, and it is right, and it is cold. It does not give back what was taken. It does not restore the voice on the end of the phone, the smell of someone's hair, the particular weight of a hand in yours. What it does do, and I do not wish to diminish this, is tell the truth. The law stood in a room and said, "This happened. This was wrong. These are the consequences." For Margaret's sake, that matters. It matters enormously. There are things I have learned from this that I did not want to learn and would not have chosen to know, but which are true nonetheless. Financial abuse within families is real, and it is common, and it does not always announce itself loudly. It often arrives quietly, dressed in helpfulness. A son who visits more often, a daughter-in-law who starts asking about superannuation, a family member who offers to handle the paperwork because you are tired or grieving or simply trust them. These gestures are not always what they appear to be, and the people who love you most are sometimes the least equipped to see the difference. Do not allow anyone, regardless of your relationship with them, to act as intermediary between you and your solicitor when you are making or amending a will. Sit in that room yourself. Ask questions yourself. Understand what you are signing before you sign it. This is not suspicion. This is dignity. If you notice a sudden change in someone's health that coincides with a change in circumstances, a will, an inheritance, a financial arrangement, and something does not sit right, trust that feeling. Trust it even when it is uncomfortable. Trust it, especially when you do not want to. And if you are a person like Bev, if you have seen something, heard something, that has been sitting in your chest like a stone for weeks or months because you are frightened or uncertain or do not want to cause harm, please understand that the harm is already there. Speaking is not what causes the damage. Silence is. The safe deposit box key is on my keyring now, alongside my house key and the car key. I have kept it not out of sentiment exactly, but because it reminds me that Margaret acted with clarity and courage in circumstances that would have paralyzed many people. She could not save herself. She worked to make sure that the truth would outlast her, and it did. On the 1-year anniversary of her death, I went to the cemetery and I sat with her for an hour in the late afternoon. The light in Hamilton at that time of year has a particular quality, very level, very gold, the shadows long across the grass. I talked to her, which I know is something and nothing simultaneously, but it helped. I told her about the trial. I told her about Paula and the grandchildren. I told her about the vegetable garden, which I have finally begun to maintain properly. She had always wanted me to take care of it, and I had always found some reason not to, and it turns out that the reason I finally did was that I needed something living to tend to. I told her I was trying. I told her that was the most honest thing I had to offer, and I hoped it was enough.